Hey guys, tonight we're gliding through a myth so oddly specific you'll be asking yourself halfway through, did that thundercloud just flirt with someone? Yes. Yes, it did. You find yourself high atop Mount Olympus, where the air is thinner than a celebrity's excuses and everything smells faintly of lightning and incense. The marble columns gleam even in the moonlight, and you're not quite sure if you're allowed to be here, but no one's stopping you. That's always a good sign. And then you see him. Zeus, king of the gods, master of lightning, chronic shapeshifter, and occasional golden raincloud. He's lounging like a man who owns several thunderbolts and knows exactly where to aim them. He gives you a look that says, "Let me tell you about the time I turned into a literal weather event to meet a girl." And you think, sure, why not? You weren't planning to sleep tonight anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your country and local time. I love seeing how far this sleepy little channel travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit beside Zeus as he strokes his beard in thought, clearly enjoying the drama about to unfold. It started, he says, on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are when I check on locked-away princesses. You blink. You weren't aware that was a scheduled thing. That day, Zeus continues, I was drifting over Argus' nice city, decent olives absolutely riddled with insecure kings. And one king in particular, Acrisius, had just done something monumentally silly. Now, Acrisius wasn't exactly Father of the Year material. He was one of those ancient kings who probably thought emotions were just a kind of weak sauce. But he did have a daughter named Dana Young, radiant, sharp-eyed. She also happened to be the center of a grim little prophecy. See, Acrisius had gone to the Oracle of Delphi, hoping for good news about producing a male heir. Instead, the oracle shrugged and said, "Actually, your daughter will have a son, and hell kill you. Not might, not could, will." Ancient oracles did not dabble in vague HR-safe language. Now, most dads would sit with this information and maybe rethink their parenting strategy. Not Acrisius. He took one look at Dana and thought, let's bronze her up and lock her down. So he had a custom-made bronze chamber, built sealed on all sides, high up in a tower, no doors, no visitors, no way for any man to even say hello. Historians still argue whether this tower was meant to be metaphorical or literal, but you imagine it as a giant glimmering panic room, except the panic is entirely on the dad's side. And Dana. She was left with books, tapestries, maybe a cat. Definitely not Wi-Fi. And here's your mainstream historical fact of the evening. In ancient Greece, women, especially royal ones, were often sequestered away for protection. Their movement was limited, their visitors monitored, and their lives a sort of velvet-cloaked solitude. Dana's tale might be exaggerated myth, but it reflects real practices of containment and control. You glance at Zeus, who's now polishing one of his thunderbolts like it's a pocket watch. Of course, he says smugly, this kind of situation is exactly when I get interested. And you sigh because, yes, we're about to talk about divine courtship again. But there's something different this time. Zeus doesn't transform into a bull or a swan or some poor bird with commitment issues. No, this time he gets creative. He watches Dana in her lonely bronze room, sees her tending her flowers, maybe humming old lullabies to pass the time. She doesn't scream or pout or curse the gods. She just endures. And Zeus, troubled, intrigued, slightly theatrical, thinks, okay, time to try something new. But before we get to the weather forecast, here's a fringe tidbit for your dreams tonight. In some versions of the myth, Zeus doesn't just become rain. He becomes golden rain, tiny droplets of gleaming divine shimmer that pour down from the ceiling cracks like a strange celestial perfume. This isn't just weather, it's jewelry in liquid form. which raises several questions about physics and absolutely none about consent because ancient myths are mostly allergic to that topic. Still, the image is oddly beautiful, sunlight melted into drops drifting through beams of bronze. You imagine Dana looking up, puzzled at first. Maybe it was warm. Maybe it smelled like ozone and nectar. Maybe it whispered things only gods whisper. Scholars debate whether this version of the myth was added later to make the story more metaphorical, less physical, or just more dreamlike for Bronze Age bedtime audiences. But one thing is certain, Dana ends up pregnant. No one knows exactly how. No one seems particularly surprised. You lean back as Zeus chuckles to himself, still full of pride. One golden cloud, he muses. One extraordinary child. And you can't help but wonder, was he showing off or just lonely? Somewhere down below in the city of Argos, King Acrisius is about to lose his royal mind. But for now the clouds drift lazily above the air, hums with ancient static, and the stars blink like they're in on the secret. You lean against a smooth celestial pillar as Zeus stretches and sighs, clearly enjoying the attention. Now, he says, let's talk about Dana. Lovely girl, quiet, stubborn, excellent taste in wall tapestries. But oh, was her family situation a mess. He waves a hand and suddenly the sky swirls like a lazy daydream, resolving into a palace in Argosan-washed stone, creeping ivy, and a courtyard filled with the kinds of fountains that serve no real purpose but to let birds gossip near running water. Dana is there, walking the narrow space outside her bronze prison, her golden hair reflecting the light like sun off wet sand. She hums to herself, trying to make the hours mean something. A gentle breeze passes through the grated ceiling, carrying the scent of laurel and lemons. She tilts her head skyward, as if she knows something or someone is watching. Let's rewind a bit, though. Before the golden cloud, before the creepy bronze room, let's meet Dana's charmingly paranoid dad, King Acrisius. Acrisius wasn't a villain exactly. He was just deeply allergic to being murdered, especially by a grandson, which, to be fair, is a niche phobia. But back then, oracles were serious business. You didn't just ignore a prophecy, you acted dramatically and usually without asking questions. So when the Oracle of Delphi told Acrisius that his future grandson would kill him, he didn't pause to consider the odds, the timeline, or the very basic possibility that he might just not be a terrible person to his daughter's child. Instead, he thought, no grandson, no problem. And because this was Greece, and logic often vacationed in the Aegean, his solution was to trap his daughter in a bronze tower completely isolated from the world. This wasn't exactly a 5-star prison, though to be fair, the plumbing was probably better than most Airbnb rentals. Historians still argue whether Dana's imprisonment was meant to be symbolic and allegory for how royal women were cut off from autonomy, or whether some version of this tale was rooted in a real practice of isolating women during key stages of life like menstruation, illness, or pregnancy. Either way, the bronze chamber becomes a symbol of shiny but suffocating control. And Dana, she's a curious figure. In most retellings, she's not described as helpless or terrified. She's quiet. Yes, but not broken. She reads, she weaves, she dreams. You get the sense that if Zeus hadn't arrived in liquid form, she might have found another way to change her fate eventually. Maybe a clever tunnel. Maybe she'd have bribed the guards with poetry and honey cakes. Here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In some ancient Greek versions, Dana isn't alone in the tower. She has a nursemaid or a servant with her, possibly someone who knows exactly when Zeus drops by as Golden Drizzle and who's decided not to mention it to the king. That's the kind of workplace drama Netflix dreams of. Back to Acrisius. He doesn't just build the tower, he commissions it. You can imagine the architect's face when told, "Yes, I want a sealed bronze chamber. No doors or windows, but let in a little rain and some filtered moonlight." Architects have heard worse, honestly. And here's a mainstream historical note for you to doze off with: bronze, while romantic in myth, was actually a highly valuable alloy in ancient times. Used for weapons, tools, and ceremonial items, it was the plastic of its era, everywhere functional, shiny. To have enough bronze to imprison a princess, that's like building a treehouse out of gold bars. Excessive, and probably a bit sweaty. Zeus, meanwhile, is doing his usual celestial rounds when he notices Dana. Now you might think the king of the gods has more pressing matters than mortal crushes. But no. Olympus is full of gossiping relatives and very few action items. He sees Dana sees the shimmering light in her tower and thinks, I could turn into an animal again, or maybe something gentler this time. It's worth pausing here to note that Zeus' disguises often raise more questions than answers. Bull, swan, eagle, golden ant, sure. But rain. How does that work? Does he have consciousness in every droplet? Does he fall through the ceiling or gently waft in like divine mist? Scholars don't agree, and frankly neither does basic meteorology. Yet in the story, Zeus descends upon Dana as golden rain. It's not aggressive, not stormy, not even particularly wet. It's described as soft, luminous, and almost musical, the way morning sun might feel if it had a scent and a mood. And somehow, because Greek myths never bother with the specifics, Dana becomes pregnant. Now there are at least 3 camps of modern interpretation here. 1. The "it's just" metaphor camp, where the golden rain represents divine inspiration or the breaking of isolation. 2. The "this is not okay" camp, which points out the troubling implications of divine visits, regardless of form. 3. And finally, the myth. Logic, don't think too hard camp, where everything makes sense because it has to. You can pick whichever helps you fall asleep. As Zeus continues to monologue beside you, he shrugs like someone whose cosmic calendar is full of weird appointments, so he says she's pregnant. The room smells like nectar and myrrh. I head back to Olympus thinking, well, that was poetic. You can't tell if he's proud or just amused at his own symbolism. Far below in Argos, Acrisius eventually discovers Dana's unexpected condition, and he is not thrilled. But that's a tale for the next moment of drifting thought. For now, the stars above your head pulse slowly like a giant's heartbeat in the sky. A breeze from Olympus tugs at your sleeve and the air is thick with old stories and strange decisions. And maybe, just maybe, a faint scent of rain. Acrisius stares at his daughter with the kind of expression normally reserved for someone who's just realized they left their goat tied to a volcano. His eyes are wide, his lips press into a flat line, and there's a lot of dramatic cloak swirling. Dana, meanwhile, calmly cradles her newborn son, Perseus, looking every inch the serene mother who absolutely did not ask for this chaos. You stand just off to the side, watching history unfold like a very tense family drama. The palace around you is all polished stone and shadowed corners, and every servant within earshot is doing their best impression of a decorative urn. Acrisius demands answers. And Dana, unfazed, tells him what happened. The god Zeus visited me as golden rain. There is a long pause. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre string snaps. Now, whether Acrisius believes her or not doesn't change what happens next. The real problem isn't her story, it's the baby. A male baby. Which means the prophecy is still alive and kicking despite all that bronze and solitude effort. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth reflects an ancient tension between fate and power. Was this a cautionary tale about trying to cheat destiny, or was it simply an old-world way to say, the harder you fight fate, the weirder it gets? Either way, Acrisius panics. You expect maybe a generous exile or a cloistered life of quiet weaving for Dana and her miracle child. But no, that would be far too reasonable. Instead, Acrisius shoves mother and infant into a wooden chesties like the kind you'd normally use for linens and has it tossed into the sea. Parenting tip. When a prophecy says your grandson will kill you, perhaps don't commit the most narratively ironic attempt at infanticide. Fate's just sitting there sipping wine, making notes. As the chest bobs away, waves gently lapping the sides, Dana wraps Perseus tighter in her shawl. The sun is already dipping toward the horizon, and the sea glows with that ancient molten orange light you only get in Greek epics. And you, floating invisibly nearby, can almost hear the ocean whisper, "Don't worry. This baby has main character energy." Here's a little known tidbit. Some versions of the myth say the chest floated for days, buffeted by waves and wind, before washing ashore on the island of Seriphos. Others claim Poseidon himself calmed the sea for Dana, either out of respect or because Zeus owed him a favor. Ancient sibling politics never boring. On Seriphos, Dana and baby Perseus are taken in by a kind fisherman named Dictys, who refreshingly does not turn out to be a secret villain, a cursed creature, or a disguised deity. Just a good guy with calloused hands and a quiet house near the shore. The island life isn't grand, but it's peaceful. The air smells of brine and roasted olives, and Dana finally sleeps without the clang of bronze echoing in her dreams. Years pass, like the tide's slow, rhythmic inevitable. Perseus grows up strong with wild curls and a stare that makes people lower their voices. He learns to fish wrestle goats and ask awkward questions about why the sun god is technically also his uncle. Zeus, watching from Olympus, mostly keeps his distance. Occasionally he sends Dana a favorable breeze or a conveniently large tuna for dinner. It's the divine version of child support. Meanwhile, you drift beside the boy as he hikes the cliffs at dawn, pockets full of pebbles and questions. He feels both mortal and not, like someone who will one day turn monsters into bedtime stories. But danger never stays gone in a myth knot when you're related to prophecy. Enter Polydectes, king of Seriphos, and brother of kindly Dictys. If Dictys is the neighborhood baker who gives kids free figs, Polydectes is the one who charges extra for rainwater and smells faintly of ambition. Polydectes sees Dana and decides with all the grace of a mythological politician that she should be his. Not because of love, not even because of her connection to Zeus, just because he wants her. He's the kind of man who thinks no is a puzzle, not an answer. Dana refuses, of course, politely, then firmly. Then with the kind of deadpan glare only a woman who's given birth to a demigod in a bronze box can muster. Polydectes doesn't take rejection well. He can't just seize. Dana Perseus is too strong, too loyal, and frankly too fond of sharp objects. So the king concocts a scheme. He throws a fake wedding feast, claims he's marrying someone else. Sure, Janus from Naxos, we totally believe you, and demands that every man in the kingdom bring him a gift. Something lavish, something impossible. Perseus, not wanting to seem poor or ungrateful, loudly declares hell bring back the head of Medusa. There's a silence at the feast, like someone just coughed in church. You listening in nearly drop your fig tart. Did he really just say that? Yes, he did. And here's your historical anchor for this portion. Medusa in ancient Greek art shifts over centuries. She starts as a monstrous, almost cartoonish figure, bulging eyes, boar tusks, snake hair. But later depictions soften her, even humanize her. Some scholars argue she reflects societal fears of feminine rage. Others think she was meant to guard sacred spaces. But everyone agrees showing up to collect her head is a very bad idea. Back in Seriphos, Dana hears about her son's promise and sighs the sigh of every mythological mother. He's either coming home a hero, she mutters, or a statue. The sea wind picks up. Far above, Zeus raises an eyebrow. and beside him you feel the air shift. Something ancient stirs, feathers, sandals, winged helmets. Help is on the way, but that too is a story for the next stars to blink into view. The moment Perseus vows to fetch Medusa's head, the fates probably lean back with their knitting and mutter, "Ah!" It begins. Because here's the thing, no one just wanders into a Gorgon's lair. It's not exactly a tourist-friendly hike. You don't get pamphlets. And Google Maps won't save you when you're staring down a creature who can petrify you faster than your uncle during a tax conversation. Still, Perseus is determined. He's got that unique blend of youthful confidence and mythological protagonist luck. You know the type. He's wrestled some goats, swung a few sticks, and now he thinks he's ready to fight supernatural horrors. Classic. The gods surprisingly agree. See, the Olympians have been watching from their marble thrones with their usual blend of aloof disinterest and occasional meddling. And now that Perseus is officially on a monster quest, the divine help hotline lights up. First on the line, Athena. Because if anyone has a personal grudge against Medusa, it's her. The story goes that Medusa, once a mortal woman of dazzling beauty, was transformed into a Gorgon by Athena after a rather grim encounter in her temple. Historians still argue whether Medusa was punished for desecration or if the myth evolved to encode complex feelings about divine justice and mortal suffering. What's clear is that Athena is invested. She appears to Perseus in a shimmer of light and battle wisdom, all gleaming eyes and calm authority. You're half convinced her armor polishes itself. She tells him flatly, "You'll need more than a sword and a good attitude." Enter Hermes, god of travelers, messengers, and very stylish footwear. He's here mostly because he's bored and because watching Perseus fumble around in sandals trying to fight a snake-haired menace sounds like quality entertainment. But also, maybe he likes the kid. He tosses Perseus a curved sword called a harpier blade with just the right curve to make monster decapitation an art form. The gift-giving continues. Athena hands him a polished bronze shield, not to use as armor, but as a mirror. Because looking directly at Medusa is well inadvisable, like staring at the sun if the sun had fangs and identity issues. And then there's the final piece of the puzzle Perseus needs: 3 more sacred objects, a magical knapsack, to carry Medusa's head-winged sandals to travel the world, and Hades' helm of invisibility. But those aren't just lying around Olympus like spare laurel wreaths. To get them, Perseus must first visit the Graeae. Now, the Graeae are 3 old sisters who share 1 eye and 1 tooth between them. Think of them as the original group chat, constantly bickering, always holding important info, and mildly terrifying. They guard the secret location of the nymphs who own the magical items Perseus needs. You follow Perseus as he sets out to find them, crossing rocky coastlines and whispering forests, the sea always just behind him like a breath. Eventually, he reaches the Graeae, nestled in a cave that smells of damp moss and old wet fabric. The sisters squabble endlessly, passing the single eyeball between them like a particularly unpopular hot potato. Now, Perseus isn't above trickery. As one sister plucks the eye from the other's wrinkled hand, he darts in, snatches it mid-air, and holds it hostage like a mischievous cat with your earbuds. The sisters shriek, wheeze, and finally agree to trade the location of the nymphs for their precious vision orb. A little rude, perhaps. Effective, absolutely. Off he goes, sandals thudding softly against the earth, until he finds the hidden grove of the nymphs. They welcome him with the kind of grace only forest-dwelling, divine-adjacent women can manage. There's a faint scent of honey in the air, and time seems to dilate around them. The nymphs, amused and perhaps a little flirty, give Perseus what he came for: the winged sandals, the leather pouch, and that infamous helm of invisibility which smells faintly like damp stone and divine mischief. Now fully equipped, Perseus feels unstoppable. The air around him seems lighter, the sandals buzz softly beneath his feet, the shield gleams like it knows something he doesn't. But don't get too comfortable. Because as he lifts off into the skies, he can fly knows not just travelling to a distant lair, he's soaring toward a monster made from rage, sorrow, and ancient curses. And she's waiting. Meanwhile, you float beside him high above the craggy lands and violet sea. You can feel the shift in energy. This isn't just a heroic errand anymore. This is a test of fate. Of wit, mercy, and maybe, if we're being honest, some spectacular divine luck. A quirky footnote here. Some ancient scholars believed the grey represented the unavoidable triad of old age decay, and wisdom literally the idea that knowledge often comes from sources we'd rather ignore. A charming reminder that sometimes the most valuable advice comes from people who cackle and smell like onions. So now Perseus has everything he needs. The sandals, the satchel, the sword. He's invisible when he wants to be armed to the teeth and carrying the favor of not one but two Olympians. Still, you can't help but wonder what's he really walking into, because Medusa isn't just a monster. Not really. She's a symbol, a tragedy, a survivor, and she's about to meet the boy who would become a legend. You hover beside Perseus now, drifting silently on the chill wind as he nears the edge of the known world, or at least the mythological one. No one's really mapped this part. Even the gods probably just scribbled, "Here be serpents" in the margins. The lair of the Gorgons sits far to the west, past lands of cracked red stone and twilight deserts where the sun seems to hesitate before sinking, and nothing dares grow except stubborn little tufts of grass that probably insult passing goats. It's there, hidden among sea spray cliffs and jagged black rocks, that Medusa waits. You can almost hear it before you see it, the hush. A peculiar silence, the kind that settles in places where time forgot to move forward. The waves crash below, but the air feels padded, muffled, like the world itself is holding its breath. Perseus touches down gently, his winged sandals folding beneath him like a bird returning to roost. He pulls the helm of invisibility over his head, and just like that, he's gone from sight. The only proof of his presence is the quiet shift of sand beneath his feet. Let's talk about Medusa's home. It's not some horror movie crypt. It's melancholy. There are columns here half fallen, draped in ivy. Statues line the pathways, not carved but frozen in mid-movement. Once men, now marble. Their expressions caught in surprise, fear, or in one case something suspiciously like mid-sneeze. These are her accidental works of art. No plaque, no signatures, just cautionary figures slowly eroding in sea wind. As Perseus inches forward, shield raised, sword sheathed, every footstep measured, you can almost feel Medusa's presence. She's not lurking. She doesn't need to lurk. She's not some screeching horror in the shadows. She's just there. She knows someone's come. She always knows. And now you see her, not directly, oh no, you're smarter than that, but reflected in the glimmering bronze shield as Perseus angles it just right. She's lying on a low slab of stone, coiled among remnants of what once might have been cushions or robes. Her snake hair shifts lazily, like they're dreaming. Some of them are snoring. There's something oddly domestic about it, like she's just woken up from a long nap and hasn't had her coffee yet. She isn't hideous, not in the way the myths scream about. There's beauty there in a tragic way. A strange grace beneath the wild. Her eyes are closed. Perhaps she's dreaming of her temple days, of her sisters, of a time before punishment became her entire personality. Now here's the trick. Perseus can't look, not once. So he inches forward, backward, yes, backward, watching only through the reflection in the shield. He lifts the harp of the curved sword, his breath tight in his throat. You can almost feel his heartbeat, wild and unsure. He hesitates, just for a second, and historians still argue whether he pitied her, whether he felt something, remorse, awe, or just the weight of being a pawn in divine drama. Then the sword flashes. It's over in an instant. A single strike. Clean, almost surgical. The snakes hiss once, then silence. He doesn't scream. He doesn't cheer. He just exhales. Shaky, quiet, almost reverent. With one fluid motion, he slips the severed head into the enchanted satchel where its petrifying power is safely contained. The air seems to sigh, as if something ancient has been released. Then something shifts, because Medusa wasn't alone. Her sisters Stheno and Euryalthe, immortal Gorgon sense the loss. They cry out a sound like metal scraping against grief, and their fury shakes the stones. Perseus does not wait for introductions. With the helm pulled low, he vanishes again into the air. Winged sandals flaring to life, he darts skyward as shrieks echo below. The sisters thrash through the ruins, striking down columns, turning over statues, their rage wild and unending. But they can't see him. That's the part people forget, how close he came to being caught. One wrong gust of wind, one misplaced footstep, and this would be a very different bedtime story. As he flies east again, the satchel bumping softly against his hip, he doesn't look back. You might think the story winds down here, but oh no, there's plenty more awkward prophecy, impossible romance, and oddly convenient timing still ahead. For now, let's take a moment to acknowledge the strange, quiet tragedy of Medusa. A monster made by gods, used by heroes, feared by Aland, rarely asked what she wanted. There's even a version of the story where, as her blood spills across the ground, something miraculous happens. From the droplets, the winged horse Pegasus is born. Yes, that Pegasus, the mythological equivalent of a surprise baby goat who can fly. Also a warrior named Chrysaor. He doesn't get as much fanfare. No wings, no catchy name, just a very shiny sword. But it's a weird birth no matter how you slice it. One minute there's a headless Gorgon, the next you've got a horse with wings galloping into the clouds, like it's late for a Renaissance festival. Historians naturally can't agree on the metaphor. Some say it symbolizes that from death comes beauty. Others think it's just a really dramatic flex by the poets. Either way, it's one more reminder that myth doesn't like to end cleanly. Even in death, Medusa makes magic. Perseus doesn't know all that yet. He's just flying heart-pounding, trying to figure out what comes next. He's got a bag full of cursed head, a pair of angry immortal sisters behind him, and a whole lot of favors to return. Also, he's still technically grounded, according to his mother. But that's a problem for later. You soar alongside Perseus as he arcs through the wind like a wayward kite with a grudge. The ocean sprawls endlessly beneath him, its foam glinting with the last orange slices of sunset. Somewhere in that enchanted satchel at his side, Medusa's head rests, sealed in myth and magic, and possibly still glaring. You're not checking. As the sun dips and shadows stretch across the land, Perseus turns his attention eastward, where trouble and heroism awaits in equal measure. Now, what the myths don't usually mention is that flying for hours with a bag full of monster head is less glamorous than it sounds. The enchanted sandals are great for lift, but not for lumbar support. There's no mid-air snack cart. And if you think it's easy steering while invisible, try doing it with high-altitude bugs slapping your face like tiny aggressive raisins. Still, he presses on, because this is where the story gets unexpectedly romantic, or at least mythologically convenient. As Perseus skims the coast of Ethiopia, something catches his eye. Something shimmering on the rocks by the sea. It's a woman, not lounging, not swimming, She's chained there, arms stretched, hair wild in the sea wind. Enter Andromeda. Now, to clarify, this is not a metaphor for emotional vulnerability. This is literal old-school Greek myth stuff. She's been left as a sacrifice to a sea monster because her mother, Queen Cassiopeia, claimed she was more beautiful than the sea nymphs. And the gods, being famously chill and measured, responded by sending a leviathan. Classic overreaction. Perseus doesn't even hesitate. He swoops lower, invisible, observing the scene. The waves surge. A deep groan rumbles from the depths. And then out it comes. The creature. Historians still argue whether it was meant to be a whale, a sea serpent, or a metaphor for midlife crises, but it's enormous, scaly, and extremely uninterested in philosophical debates. Now here's where Perseus gets clever. He doesn't just fly in sword first like a Greek Buzz Lightyear. He times it. He watches the monster surge forward, and then, at just the right moment, he pulls Medusa's head from the satchel and turns it toward the beast. The sea monster freezes. Literally, mid-roar, mid-wave. 1 second it's hungry, the next it's a garden ornament. The ocean hushes. Andromeda, who's been politely panicking this whole time, blinks up in astonishment. She has questions. But Perseus, still invisible, still heroic, lands beside her and gently breaks the chains. Only then does he take off the helm. Yes, it's a bit theatrical. But come on. You've just slain a monster with a head in a bag. You're allowed a dramatic reveal. Andromeda stares. Not at the winged sandals or the glinting sword, but at his face, which, to be fair, probably looks like a tired, wind-burnt courier who just finished the weirdest delivery of his life. Still, sparks fly. They speak. Not fluently, ancient Greek pickup lines are questionable at best, but the sentiment lands. Some say they fall in love instantly. Others suggest Perseus just didn't want to carry the head all the way home alone. Either way, the local King Andromeda's dad is grateful. Mostly. He agrees to let them marry until a prior fiancé shows up with his own army and a serious grudge. Oh yes, drama incoming. Drama. The wedding's barely begun, probably mid-hummus course, when the jilted suitor storms in. His name's Phineas, and he's not impressed by Perseus' glowing resume or magic accessories. Words are exchanged, then weapons, and then once again, Medusa's head is summoned like the mythological version of an air horn at a bar fight. Phineas and his crew turn to stone, mid-shout, mid-sword swing. One poor guy is frozen sneezing again. Must have been a thing. It's not exactly polite, but it is effective. The wedding continues minus a few guests. And thus, Perseus and Andromeda begin their life together, not with a slow courtship or candlelit dinners, but with monster-slaying cursed heads and an impromptu engagement party turned stony silent. Somehow, it works. Historians and poets still debate whether Andromeda had much say in all of this, whether she was swept off her feet or just swept up in the narrative. But in the myths, they rule together peacefully. She gives him children. He gives her stories. And the head of Medusa, still safely tucked away, still dangerously potent, like expired yogurt that really shouldn't be opened. Before long, it's time to return to Argos. Because, surprise, he still has one last prophecy to fulfill. Remember the oracle's warning that Acrisius, his grandfather, would be killed by his own grandson? Well, that's been simmering quietly in the background like an unpaid parking ticket, and now it's time to face it. On the way home, Perseus participates in a discus-throwing contest, as one does. There's a breeze, the disc veers, and wouldn't you know it, it strikes an elderly spectator, killing him instantly. The man Acrisius, yep. Even myths love poetic irony. Perseus is devastated. He never meant for this. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a duel. It was just fate flexing its muscle in the background. And so the prophecy fulfills itself, not with malice, but with tragic inevitability. He doesn't take the throne of Argos, by the way. Out of guilt, he trades it for another kingdom entirely Tyrins. Maybe he'd had enough of inherited drama. So here you are now, floating above the lands of Tyrins as Perseus and Andromeda settle into a quieter kind of legend. But don't doze off yet, because Zeus has been watching, and he has plans. You're reclining now, perhaps somewhere in a gentle olive grove of the mind, when a quiet rumble rolls across the clouds. It's not thunder. Not this time. It's the low celestial chuckle of Zeus, king of Olympus, shapeshifter supreme, and an absolute menace to tranquil domesticity. Let's pause and set the divine scene. High above mortal messes and monster fights lies Mount Olympus, crisp air, eternal daylight, and the kind of decor that screams mythological luxury. Crystal goblets, impossibly white marble, and a faint aroma of ambrosia which probably tastes like honeyed cloud and cosmic smugness. Here the gods lounge in timeless splendor, playing games with fate like bored aristocrats with an eternal subscription to chaos. Zeus, as king of the gods, should be concerned with matters of state, justice, order, thunderbolt maintenance. But on this particular afternoon, his gaze is drifting not to political disputes or inter-god drama, but downward, toward the mortal realm, specifically to a small, sun-drenched palace belonging to a woman named Dana. Yes, that Dana. You remember, locked in a bronze tower by her paranoid father Acrisius to prevent the birth of a prophecy-busting grandson. Small problem when you're dealing with Zeus architecture is more suggestion than obstacle. The story goes like this. Zeus, being Zeus, spies Dana from Olympus. She's beautiful, lonely, and quite thoroughly imprisoned. And what does our celestial Casanova do? Does he introduce himself respectfully? Send a nice letter? No. He turns into golden rain. Yes, actual rain. Shimmering, sparkly droplets of divine essence. It slips through the tiny cracks of the tower, spills across the floor like a spilled treasure chest, and somehow impregnates her. There's no way to explain this. That doesn't sound like a bizarre weather report. But the Greeks were never big on plausible mechanics when divine romance was involved. Historians still argue whether this tale is meant to symbolize the unstoppable nature of fate, the divine intervention in mortal lineage, or simply ancient metaphor taken several steps too far. Dana becomes pregnant. Alone in her prison, no visitors, no keys, and only this glittering rainfall as her celestial suitor. You could say she got rained on, but not in the way modern slang implies. 9 months later, baby Perseus. Cue the parental panic from Acrisius, the whole bronze chest at sea solution, and the beginnings of a saga. But back to Zeus. This Raincloud maneuver wasn't a one-time thing. No, our boy has a pattern. Take leader queen of Sparta. Zeus saw her strolling by a lake, possibly enjoying a quiet moment, and thought, you know what would really wow her, becoming a swan. Not metaphorically, literally. He transforms into a swan, glossy feathers, regal neck, the works, and seduces her, allegedly. The myths are vague, tastefully awkward. She later lays 2 eggs because apparently that's what happens when divine birds get involved. Then there's Europa. Zeus transforms into a bullies a massive shining white bull and lures her onto his back before galloping off across the sea. A surprise ocean commute, if you will. And let's not forget Antiope. He appeared as a satyr, or Alcmene, as her own husband-wikes, or Semele, to whom he eventually appeared in full god form, which, spoiler alert, vaporized her. Are you detecting a theme? The gods of Olympus, especially Zeus, are creative. Troublingly so. Each of these myths comes with shimmering imagery, uncomfortable logistics, and at least one poor mortal woman left with divine consequences and very few explanations. Historians and classicists still debate what these stories truly meant to the ancient Greeks. Were they metaphors for the randomness of fate, reflections of how ancient societies viewed power, gender, and the divine? Or were they just vivid campfire tales passed down to explain why that one kid down the road is suspiciously excellent at wrestling monsters? Whatever the case, Zeus' golden rain entrance into Dana's life is a moment of both absurdity and mythic gravity. It begins a story that snakes through generations, from prophecy to peril, from a drifting chest to the petrification of sea monsters. And it all starts with a soft patter of liquid gold falling onto cold stone. Now let's zoom out for a moment. Imagine being a mythographer, a collector of stories in ancient times. You hear whispers of a hero born from light, of a woman alone in a tower visited by rain. How do you record it? Do you nod sagely and simply say, "Ah yes, divine precipitation, classic Zeus"? Or do you scribble it down and shrug, thinking, this will never make sense, but it sure sells pottery? Because that's the thing about Greek myths. They weren't always clean narratives. They were living, evolving tales passed between generations, adjusted for time, geography, and the storyteller's flair. In some versions, Dana willingly accepts her fate. In others, she's utterly baffled by it. Sometimes she believes it was a dream. Sometimes she knows exactly what's happened. And the rain always gold, always falling through the tiniest crack, always leaving behind the start of a legend. And if you're wondering whether Dana ever got a proper explanation, some cloud-born apology note, a fruit basket from Olympus well-number Zeus rarely sticks around. The gods are notorious for their vanishing acts, especially once the consequences arrive in swaddling cloth. So there she is, Dana, now a mother, still locked in a tower, staring at her child and the puddle of once shimmering rainfall. And somewhere far above, Zeus probably reclines on a celestial sofa, sipping star wine and thinking, "Nailed it." You meanwhile drift slowly through the folds of this tale, letting its soft absurdity wash over you, like a gentle rain that's decidedly more metaphorical than mythological. The gods, fickle as they are, have left their imprint. But you're just getting cozy. You're floating now, lulled by the rhythm of waves on bronze. Because remember, that golden rainchild Perseus doesn't get to stay snug in that tower nursery. Nope. Grandpa Acrisius, in a panic over the prophecy that his grandson will one day end him, does what any wildly overreacting monarch might do. Orders a carpenter to build a coffin-sized crate, not for burial, mind you, for buoyancy. And so baby Perseus and Dana are bundled into a wooden chest, nailed shut, and lovingly tossed into the sea like mythological driftwood. Because in ancient Greece, when you want to avoid a prophecy, the logical first step is mild infanticide by ocean voyage. You bob along beside them now, salt spray kissing your cheeks. The Aegean is surprisingly calm tonight. Stars glitter overhead. The baby snuffles. Dana hums something wordless, not quite lullaby, not quite prayer. Her arms tighten around her son, and somewhere Poseidon watches, probably eating olives and muttering, "Why do mortals keep throwing stuff into my sea?" Historians still debate how much of this tale is borrowed from older flood myth echoes of Moses of Sargon, even of Mesopotamian kings adrift in reed baskets. The chest at sea trope is a favorite across cultures, which raises the question, was this Dana's real punishment? Or was it just narrative convenience with some seawater drama? Whatever the reason, the chest eventually drifts toward the island of Seriphos, a quiet little rock in the Aegean with goat's fish and exactly one opportunistic king. Enter Dictys, a kindly fisherman and island everyman. He finds the chest beached like a strange gift from the gods. Dana, salt-drenched and exhausted, clutches her son. She has no kingdom, no clothes, and no clue what happens next. But Dictys, he takes them in. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Greek islands like Seriphos were known for small, self-sufficient communities. Fishing, goat herding, and olive farming dominated daily life. Hospitality was a moral obligation, xenia they called it. Zeus himself was said to guard the sacred bond between guest and host. Ironic given his own hospitality record. Now back to the story. Dana and Perseus settle into island life. You picture Dana weaving baskets, learning goat names. Perseus grows into a strong-limbed, quiet-eyed young man, raised not in royal splendor, but in salty wind and fish scales. And just when you think things might finally quiet down, Dictys' brother shows up. Meet Polydectes, king of Seriphos, wearer of fine sandals and man with the unsettling habit of stroking his beard while scheming. He takes one look at Dana still, radiant, still noble despite years of exile, and decides he must have her. Dana, of course, says, hard pass. Polydectes is not amused. Now, because this is ancient myth, he doesn't throw a tantrum or send her home. No, he hatches a plot so convoluted and petty it could have been workshopped in a drama club. He decides to marry someone else purely as a ploy, mind you, and demands every man on the island bring him a horse as a wedding gift. A horse on a tiny rocky island where no one owns horses, except maybe Perseus, who shows up with nothing but strong arms and an even stronger sense of misplaced pride. When Perseus admits he can't provide a horse, Polydectes smiles and says, "No worries, just bring me the head of Medusa instead." You pause, you blink, you laugh softly. Yes, that Medusa. The Gorgon. Snake hair, stone gaze. That one. It's a classic Greek bait and switch. No horse. How about a suicide mission? And Perseus, brave, loyal, slightly knave. Perseus says, all right, because when you've been raised by a single mom in exile and your family history includes magical rainfall and ocean chests, you probably don't question the logistics of monster decapitation as much as you should. Let's pause here for your quirky tidbit. In early Greek art, Medusa wasn't always portrayed as monstrous. In some archaic depictions, she's almost comical, tongue-out, googly eyes, more emoji than end boss. It's only in later art and literature that she becomes terrifying, tragic, and distinctly femme fatale-ish. And here's the kicker: historians still argue whether Medusa was always meant to be a villain or if she was a misunderstood figure, later rebranded by storytellers with different agendas. Was she once a goddess in her own right? A protective symbol, or just a convenient scapegoat for heroic resumes? Back to our tale. Polydectes watches Perseus sail off smug in his manipulation. He's confident the boy will perish in some dusty ruin far from Seriphos. Dana, he figures, will be his reward for patience. But what he doesn't count on is divine networking. Because despite his humble beginnings, Perseus has friends, big ones. Athena lends him her mirrored shield. Hermes loans him winged sandals and a cool hat, the cap of invisibility, though frankly that feels like Hermes emptying his accessory drawer. The gods may be erratic, but they love a good monster hunting arc. And you, dear listener, get to follow along as Perseus prepares to face a creature with a gaze deadlier than any argument at a family dinner. For now, the island grows quiet behind him. Polydectes plots. Dana waits. And you, resting easily now, drift beside Perseus as he takes flight, quite literally, toward a fate inked in prophecy, wrapped in divine gifts, and coiled with serpents. But don't worry, we'll take it slow, one winged step at a time. You're soaring now, high above the clouds, tethered only by the winged sandals Hermes lent Perseus. Feel the crisp mountain air brushing past your skin, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant seas. The world below shrinks, and time seems to slow, just enough for you to savor every moment of this quiet, surreal flight. Perseus is on a mission, yes. But it's not just about chopping off a monster's head. It's a rite of passage, a journey that will carve his name into the starry tapestry of legend. Before he confronts Medusa, there's preparation. Because mythic quests, much like good naps, need a bit of setting up. First, there's the matter of finding the grey ether three sisters who share one eye and one tooth between them. Picture this: three ancient crones, bent and toothless, passing a single eyeball back and forth like it's a hot potato. Quite the communal arrangement, and a little unsettling for anyone who appreciates personal space. Perseus needs to borrow that eye to bargain for directions to the Gorgons, Medusa included, so he quietly snatches it while they're distracted. Imagine the confusion: 1 minute the sisters squinting around, the next blind as bats. This scene has always sparked scholarly debate. Was the Grey's shared eye a symbol of collective knowledge or a metaphor for limited perception? Some argue they represent the inevitable passage of time, while others suggest a cautionary tale about reliance on shared resources. Anyway, with the eye in hand, Perseus negotiates safe passage to the lair of the Gorgons. But he's not going unarmed. Athena's mirrored shield comes into play here, a perfect defensive tool against a monster whose gaze petrifies. By looking at Medusa's reflection, instead of directly, Perseus avoids a permanent statue status. It's a clever, almost playful tactic, like playing peekaboo with a deadly snake-haired lady. And Hermes' cap of invisibility, a sneaky bonus for getting in and out unseen. The entire setup almost feels like a gentle puzzle rather than a brutal battle. As you drift along, it's easy to picture the eerie lair, a dark cavern dotted with statues, former victims frozen mid-scream or mid-flight, silent witnesses to Medusa's lethal gaze. The air must be heavy with stillness, maybe a faint smell of moss and old stone. Medusa herself is often misunderstood. Unlike her immortal sisters, she's mortal, vulnerable, and depending on the version, a tragic figure cursed by Athena after an unfortunate incident involving Poseidon. Historians still debate whether Medusa was ever portrayed purely as evil, or if she symbolized something more complex, perhaps a warning or a representation of female rage and power suppressed by patriarchal narratives. In any case, Perseus approaches carefully, his shield acting as a mirror to her deadly visage. With a steady hand and nerves of steel, or perhaps a bit of divine intervention, he beheads Medusa without looking directly. You might imagine this moment as shockingly violent, but in many retellings, it's surprisingly clinical, even almost serene: the strike, the silence, the head tumbling away. And here's your quirky tidbit. The blood from Medusa's neck gives birth to Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden sworded giant. So from death comes new life, something oddly comforting to hold on to as you sink deeper into relaxation. With the head safely stowed, Perseus dons the cap of invisibility and makes his escape, passing by the now peaceful lair and the silent stone witnesses. Flying homeward, the weight of his quest shifts from fear to triumph. But the journey is far from over. There are more twists ahead, more gods to outwit, and family drama worthy of any soap opera. Meanwhile, back on Seriphos, Polydectes grows impatient, his intentions toward Dana become increasingly clear. But for now, you and Perseus are gliding gently through the skies, wrapped in a myth that blends danger, wit, and a touch of melancholy. You breathe out slowly, letting the story's rhythm ease you toward whatever dreams await. The gods might be unpredictable, but their tales have a soothing cadence all their own. Word count. 67. Awaiting continue. 4. 1 mini b any continue. ChatGPT ni section 10. You glide now through a soft haze, the horizon blurring as Perseus begins his journey back to Seriphos, the island that has been his reluctant home and the stage for this unfolding family drama. The golden head of Medusa hangs carefully at his side, still and silent, yet packed with a power that could freeze anyone who dares meet its gaze. It's like carrying a ticking mythological time bomb, only much heavier and infinitely more fascinating. Before you, the sea sparkles lazily, reflecting a lazy sun that seems to be in no rush, much like the storytelling pace you've settled into tonight. Perseus' flight is steady but cautious. No triumphant fanfare, just the whisper of winged sandals slicing through air and the steady beat of a hero who's learned that legends don't write themselves, they are quietly earned. Now remember, Dictys, the kind fisherman who rescued Dana and raised Perseus, his humble kindness will soon face a harsh test. Polydectes, the island's scheming ruler, has not forgotten his plans for Dana, and he's less subtle than a philosopher's lecture on insomnia. His jealousy and greed bubble beneath a polished exterior like olive oil settling at the bottom of a jar. Polydectes demands that Perseus hand over Medusa's head as a trophy, but Perseus, wise beyond his years, knows better than to comply. You feel the tension thickening like honey, slow and inevitable. It's a test of power, a showdown, not of brute strength, but of will. There's something oddly comforting in how this conflict plays out. No sudden screams or epic battles, just strategic moves and quiet resolve. The classic clash between tyranny and justice unfolds like a gentle chess game on a sunlit terrace. A historical aside, in ancient Greek society, kingship was often precarious, relying heavily on the favor of both gods and subjects. Islands like Seriphos were particularly vulnerable to power struggles due to their isolation and limited resources. Polydectes' tactics, while ruthless, were typical of small rulers trying to assert control in a fragile world. And speaking of fragile, let's talk about the Gorgonean, the image of Medusa's head. It became a protective emblem in ancient Greece, adorning shields, temples, and even coins. The idea was simple: use the terrifying visage to ward off evil. It's like carrying your own personalized nightlight, only much more effective and a lot cooler looking. Scholars still debate whether this practice was originally meant to scare away enemies, or if it had deeper religious significance tied to protection and fertility. Either way, the symbolism stuck around long after the myths faded into bedtime stories. Back to Perseus. He does not surrender Medusa's head, but instead uses it cleverly. When Polydectes threatens Dana, Perseus reveals the head, and Polydectes instantly turns to stone. The king's ambition and cruelty literally become a monument frozen forever in a silent, rock-solid warning. Imagine that a ruler so obsessed with control that he becomes the ultimate still life. It's a quietly poetic end befitting the slow pace of this tale. You watch as peace settles back over Seriphos. Dana, finally free from fear, can breathe again. Perseus, now a true hero, understands that power is not just about strength, but wisdom and timing. Here's a quirky detail for you. The petrification motif appears in other myths and folklore, often symbolizing the consequences of hubris or moral failure. It's a gentle reminder that sometimes the greatest punishment is becoming a permanent statue in someone else's story. You let the soft waves and warm sun soak into your mind, feeling a calmness that only ancient tales told slowly and with care can bring. Perseus' story is winding down, but there's still a little more to unfold. Peaceful conclusion, some gentle reflections, and the quiet magic of myths that soothe the restless mind. The sea air feels warmer now as you drift alongside Perseus, who's settling back into life on Seriphos, with the calm confidence of someone who's just outwitted gods and monsters. It's a good day for goat herding, for weaving baskets, for watching the horizon and knowing you belong, even if your beginnings were as turbulent as a stormy Aegean night. But life in myth rarely grants much peace before the next twist. Perseus, fresh from his daring victory, knows his story isn't quite finished. There's still that small prophecy hanging over him, the one about his grandfather Acrisius, and the ominous fate waiting somewhere down the line. You might think, a prophecy. Classic mythology, it's always lurking like a persistent mosquito at dusk. And you'd be right. The Greeks loved these things, turning fate into an almost living character in their stories, one that can't be escaped, no matter how fast or far you run. Perseus decides to leave Seriphos partly to protect Dana from further troubles, partly because the road calls to him, as roads often do in stories like these. So you picture him setting off not with fanfare, but with the gentle determination of a man who's done what he must and is ready for whatever comes next. Now here's a little historical seasoning. Ancient Greeks placed enormous faith in oracles and prophecies. The Oracle of Delphi, for example, was famous for ambiguous predictions that often led to unintended consequences, like a cosmic game of telephone gone delightfully wrong. Historians still argue whether these prophecies were genuinely believed or more of a storytelling device to explain the unexplainable twists of fate. Perseus' travels take him across the mainland and through small villages where life moves at a gentle pace. Farmers tending olives, children playing by streams, elders sharing stories in the fading light. You can almost hear the soft murmur of daily life, the occasional clink of pottery, the distant bleating of sheep. On this journey, Perseus unknowingly nears the kingdom of Argos, where Acrisius still rules, burdened by fear and paranoia. The irony is rich, isn't it? The grandfather who once tried to avoid fate now lives under its shadow, unaware that the very hero he tried to banish is nearing his doorstep. You notice how these myths paint a picture of inevitability. Actions meant to prevent prophecies often bring them about. It's like a cosmic loop of cause and effect, quietly repeating with a tragic grace. As Perseus approaches Argos, he hears whispers of local games and contests, the kind that bring entire communities together. These athletic gatherings are the social lifeblood of the era, with foot races, discus throws, and javelin contests that demand strength and skill, but also foster camaraderie. You might smile to know that the ancient Olympics, which began in 776 BCE, were a real event. Even back then, people appreciated a good competition to spice up an otherwise slow day. Historians still argue whether these games were primarily religious festivals or early forms of international diplomacy. And here's a quirky detail. Some say the idea of tossing a discus originated from soldiers practicing throwing their shield stalk. About multitasking in ancient training, Perseus, drawn by the festive atmosphere and perhaps a need to test his own strength, enters one of these contests. You picture him among the crowd, calm but focused, muscles coiled and ready, not unlike a cat deciding whether to chase the next sunbeam. The event itself is peaceful, rhythmic. The cheers are soft, the sun warm. And then comes the throw. A discus arcs gracefully through the air, cutting a perfect curve against the sky. But fate, true to its pattern, has other plans. The discus veers off course and strikes an elderly man in the crowd, Acrisius. The man collapses, stunned. Perseus rushes forward, heart pounding, the prophecy fulfilled in a quiet, unintended moment. You might find this a strangely gentle end to a dramatic tale, but that's the beauty of these myths told slowly. They remind you that destiny often arrives not with a bang, but with the softest of touches, like a feather landing on a windowsill. So here you are floating in this mythic moment of calm and inevitability. The air still warm and golden, as the story softly closes one chapter and readies for the next. The gentle quiet that follows a Chryseis fall feels almost like a breath held softly in the fading light. You find yourself drifting alongside Perseus, who is now grappling with the weight of fate fulfilled, not by malice, but by the quiet hand of chance, that ever-present companion in these ancient stories. It's easy to imagine the soft rustling of olive branches overhead, the distant chirping of cicadas, and the faint murmur of villagers gathering to tend to the fallen king. The scene unfolds with the deliberate calm of a painter's brushstroke, every detail inviting you to slow down and soak it all in. Perseus, despite the tragic outcome, carries no bitterness. He's become a figure of quiet dignity, embodying a balance between human will and divine destiny. The story leaves you with a gentle reflection on how sometimes even the grandest of fates are carried out through the simplest of moments. Historians still debate how these tales shaped Greek views on justice and destiny. Was Perseus a hero simply because he succeeded, or because he accepted what life handed him, no matter how soft or sharp? The ambiguity makes the myth feel less like a sermon and more like a lullaby, complex but soothing. Now, shifting gears a little, let's take a peek at some of the more everyday aspects of Greek life around Perseus' time. It's surprisingly easy to get lost in the slow rhythms of ancient routines, the grinding of grain in a stone mill, the rhythmic pounding echoing through village streets, the delicate scent of freshly baked bread wafting from communal ovens, the soft clink of pottery as families gather for evening meals. Food was central to these communities, not just for survival, but as a source of comfort and social connection. Historians still argue whether the famed Mediterranean diet was actually common or a later idealized invention. But one thing's for sure: olive oil, fresh vegetables, and honey sweetened the days in ways both literal and metaphorical. A quirky detail: the Greeks often used herbs not only to flavor their food, but also as subtle remedies. Thyme, for instance, was prized for its calming properties, an ancient form of sleep aid that might make you wonder if these stories were intended to gently lull listeners to rest all along. As the sun dips lower, you can almost hear the soft conversation drifting from the agora, where neighbors share news tales and a few laughs. It's a reminder that behind every mythic figure like Perseus are ordinary lives filled with slow moments of joy, worry, and connection. And speaking of connection, there's something quietly comforting in the way these myths loop back to universal themes: family, courage, fate, and sometimes just the simple pleasure of a well-timed escape. So, as you relax into this lull, imagine Perseus resting beneath a spreading olive tree, the day's light fading to twilight, the sounds of the village settling into the gentle hum of night. It's a perfect place to pause before the final whispers of this myth drift off with you. The night deepens gently around Perseus as you settle into the softer rhythms of his stories. Close, a warm breeze rustling the leaves above like a whispered secret. You follow him now, not with urgency, but with a kind of quiet companionship, as the hero's footsteps slow and the tension eases. After the whirlwind of adventures and prophecies, Perseus' later life offers something almost like the peace of an afternoon nap: quiet moments spent with loved ones, small acts of kindness, and the occasional reflective sigh as the stars begin to twinkle. It's an odd comfort to imagine a hero letting down his guard, just as you're letting down yours tonight. Historical records don't mention much about Perseus' final years, which leaves plenty of room for your imagination to fill in the soft edges. Some ancient sources suggest he ruled Mycenae wisely, bringing stability after years of mythic chaos. Others hint at quieter, less heroic days, where the greatest battles were perhaps those of patience and peacekeeping. Historians still argue whether Perseus' rule was legendary or largely symbolic, a reminder that sometimes the stories we hold on to are more about the ideas they inspire than literal truths. And maybe that's the point the myths linger, not because they tell us exactly what happened, but because they capture feelings and values that endure. Here's a small soothing oddity in some later tales. Perseus is linked to the constellation. Perseus, a twinkling group of stars said to watch over sailors and travelers. It's a gentle celestial nod, as if the night sky itself remembers and guards the hero's journey, guiding you too as you drift towards sleep. The intertwining of myth and cosmos was common in ancient Greek culture. They looked to the stars not just for navigation, but for storytelling, connecting human life to the vast universe in a comforting way. Some scholars propose these star myths functioned as a kind of ancient mindfulness practice, calming thoughts by placing personal stories in a grand, orderly cosmos. And speaking of calm, let's remember how Perseus' story, with its slow unfolding drama and gentle humour, mirrors the soft unfolding of night itself. No sudden jolts or shocks here, just a steady glide into restfulness. As you relax, you might picture Perseus shield the aegis softly glowing with Medusa's head, not as a weapon of fear, but as a protective charm, casting a warm, reassuring light in the dark. So as the story winds down, you feel wrapped in the cozy folds of myth and memory, the weight of legend light as a feather pillow. The stars above twinkle softly as you follow Perseus in these last chapters of his mythic life, drifting gently through stories that blend history, legend, and a touch of everyday magic. There's a soothing rhythm here, a slow dance of light and shadow courage, and quiet moments, much like the lullabies your own ancestors might have whispered long ago. Perseus' legacy, you realize, is not just about heroic feats or divine encounters. It's about the subtle ways his tale weaves into the fabric of human experience. Family ties the pull of destiny and the quiet strength found in accepting life's ebb and flow. You might be surprised to learn that in some versions, Perseus marries Andromeda, a princess he rescued, adding a tender note to his story. Their union represents hope and renewal, a soft contrast to the harder edges of prophecy and battle. It's the kind of love story that grows slowly like the first buds of spring after a long winter. Historians still argue whether this part of the myth developed later, influenced by evolving cultural ideals of marriage and family. Whatever the case, the image of Perseus and Andromeda offers a gentle closure to a tale filled with sharp turns and dramatic skies. On a lighter note, the myth of Perseus has inspired everything from Renaissance art to modern movies, though you probably won't find the golden Raincloud quite as poetic in a blockbuster chase scene. That's the charm of slow storytelling. It lets the details linger, inviting you to savor rather than rush. Here's a quirky detail to tuck away: the idea of Zeus transforming into a golden raincloud isn't just a flashy disguise. In ancient symbolism, rainclouds represented fertility and renewal, soft, life-giving water falling gently from the sky, nourishing the earth below. It's a quiet kind of power, the opposite of thunder and lightning's loud drama. The Greeks had a special appreciation for the softer sides of nature, a reminder that even gods could embody gentleness alongside might. It's a lovely balance to hold in your mind as you settle deeper into this quiet moment. So now, as Perseus' story slowly fades like the last glow of sunset, you find yourself cradled in the calm wisdom of myth's timeless tales that soothe the mind and quiet the heart. Just like you, settling into the comforting embrace of night. The night is thick with calm as you drift alongside the lingering echoes of Perseus' tale. It's a story that's unfolded slowly, gently, like soft waves lapping against a quiet shore. No rush, no urgency. Yes, the steady pulse of myth breathing softly through time. By now you've met gods cloaked in rainclouds, monsters turned to stone, by clever heroes and prophecies fulfilled in the gentlest of ways. These aren't the stories of sharp swords and violent clashes. They're whispers in the dark moments of quiet reflection, wrapped in the velvet cloak of history and legend. In these last moments, imagine the ancient Greek world settling into sleep around you, the faint scent of olive groves under a cool night sky, the distant chorus of crickets and nightbirds blending into a natural lullaby. It's the perfect backdrop for stories designed to slow your thoughts and invite rest. Historians still debate how much of these myths were meant as entertainment versus spiritual lessons. But what's clear is their power to connect use across millennia with the shared human experience of wonder, hope, and the gentle acceptance of fate. Here's a small soothing fact. The Greeks believed that dreams were messages from the gods, often delivered during the soft hours before dawn. So, as you sink deeper into sleep, you might imagine Perseus' story weaving through your own dreams, a quiet guide through the landscape of night. And remember that golden raincloud, Zeus' soft disguise, hovering gently above, showering the world with a calm you can almost feel. Now, as you let your eyes close and your mind soften, take in the slow rhythm of the night. The stories, the stars, the subtle magic of myths all blending into the peaceful quiet that invites you to rest. Thank you for sharing this journey. May your dreams be as gentle and full of wonder as the myths themselves. As you settle fully into your bed, feel the weight of the day dissolve like morning mist under the sun's slow rise. The gentle stories of Perseus and his golden raincloud have brought you here too, a place where the past and present mingle quietly like a soft breeze brushing through olive branches. There's a comforting rhythm to these old tales, a slow unfolding that matches the steady beat of your breath, the calm pulse of your heart. They remind you that sometimes the greatest adventures happen not in storms or battles, but in the quiet moments between where courage is measured in patience and destiny in acceptance. Let the sounds around you, the whisper of a fan, the soft hum of the night wrap you in their gentle embrace. Imagine the stars above twinkling kindly, sending down their ancient light to guide you into rest. No need to rush or worry. The myths will be here whenever you return, ready to carry you gently once more. For now, just breathe deeply and feel yourself drifting, carried by the soft currents of history and story. Sleep well, knowing you've walked alongside gods and heroes and found calm in their quiet tales. Good night.